And unassigned frames can be used when you want to create a shape in InDesign that maybe you're not going to put a graphic into, but you're just going to fill with a solid color and put some effects like a drop shadow or something like that on. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about those unassigned frames. Now, up until this point, we have used graphic frames and text frames, like I said. And when you zoom in to your document and come down here to the second page of our document, you're going to see that when you have a graphic frame, if you remember, you get this X in it. Right there you have a frame that's just waiting for a graphic to be placed in it, and you can tell because it's got this X across it. But let's go ahead and grab this frame, and I'm going to delete it by hitting the delete button. And then I'm going to come over, and this was our rectangular frame tool. That's what we use as a placeholder for our graphics. And right below it is the rectangle tool. And if we go ahead and we click on that, and we come back to this area, and we go back up in the top left corner and click and drag, and just basically make the same shape and let go, you'll see that you have a similar frame, but you now don't have that X across it. Instead, you have a center dot. And that center dot, what it's telling you is that this is an unassigned frame. And the great part about unassigned frames is that now you can go in and you can fill them with color, you can change the stroke, there's all kinds of things that you can do with these frames. And you can work with it by coming up here and clicking on your selection tool. The selection tool, when you have it selected, you can see that your unassigned frame gets these little handles, is what they're called, and you can click on them and use it to change the size of your rectangle. Here we're making it horizontally, wider or less wide. You can go up to the top and you get the diagonal handles, and then you can scale it that way, or you can come down here to the one at the bottom if you want to make it shorter or taller. By using the selection tool, you can play with what's called this bounding box and change the shape of your object. Another thing that you can do with your selection tool is you can actually move your box around. If I come here and I select my rectangle and I've got the bounding box up and I just grab and drag by clicking and dragging, I can move my box around my layout. Those are things that I can do with my selection tool. Now, if I only want to select a part of an object, I can do that by coming over to the tool directly below it. And this is my direct selection tool. And by coming over to my direct selection tool, the white arrow, and going over an area, I can now manipulate just this corner of the box and start to do some really interesting things to my rectangle. Because now all I'm doing is I'm playing directly with that one aspect of my rectangle. So that's two things that you can do when you use your unassigned frames in your rectangle shape. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to go back into our direct selection tool, and I'm going to talk about this control panel up here. In this control panel, you're going to see all of the properties that your rectangle that you created have. This X and this Y right here are giving you the placement of your rectangle on the page. And by moving these arrows up and down, you can move the rectangle slightly, just one point at a time. Your width and height of your rectangle are controlled with this W and H boxes right here respectively. And once again, by going and clicking on these up and down arrows, you can slightly change the dimensions of your rectangle so that you can get them precisely the size that you want them and need them. Over here you have this link button. If you select your link button, this will make sure that your width and height are constrained together, so when you make your width bigger, it will also increase your height proportionally so that the proportions of your rectangle stay the same if that's what you want to happen. If you want to be able to adjust the width without adjusting the height at the same time, just unclick that length. Next, you have these arrows. Do kind of the same thing as your width and height. They increase or decrease the size of your rectangle, but they do so as a percentage. Next, you've got controls for rotating your box. And if you go into here and you select, you can see that your rectangle has now rotated. Or you can shear it. And shearing is actually just kind of distorting your box. you have now distorted it and turned it into more of a parallelogram by using shear. And these two boxes are important because this is your fill and this is your stroke. Right now, your rectangle, it looks pretty boring and pretty bare, but if you come up here to your fill box and you click on your right arrow, you're going to get a list of colors. And when you click on one of these, you can see that the second you click on it, it fills your rectangle. Now, if we don't like that, want to go to red, just click on that. Now, maybe you don't like just these colors. Maybe you want a different color. I can actually come back over here and hover over this red box here and double click on it. And I can change my color by changing the amount of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black in it. And as you can see, by just playing around with these little knobs, I start to get different colors. Another thing that you can do is that you've got the color type, and right now we have a process color. You can also change it to a spot color if you wanted, but for now we're just going to go ahead and leave it at process color. Additionally, you can change from CMYK to RGB if you need a different color mode. CMYK is using the printing industry, and RGB is the color mode that's generally used for digital. Maybe I want kind of a teal here. And then let's say, okay, now I can do a preview, and that will show me that that's what that color is going to look like. And maybe that's a little dark for my taste, so I'll drop that down, make it a little more teal, and then say, okay. Now I have a filled rectangle. Well, that looks pretty good, but I'd also like to have a stroke around the rectangle so that it sticks out a little bit more. Now you come down here to the box below it, and this is your stroke. And go ahead, and once again we're going to click the arrow, and this time I'm going to pick a yellow color and double click on it, and we're going to make it a little less bright and banana-like and more maybe on the orange side, maybe a little lighter too, like that. And then go ahead and hit OK, and now there should be a stroke around my box, but you can barely see it because it's only 1 point. So the next thing we want to do is we want to come here, and this is your stroke size. Right now we only have a 1 point stroke, but as you can see, as it gets bigger, I now have a much bigger yellow line around my box. So we're going to come over here to this page right here. And when you're looking at this page, you can see that you have this layout, but right in the middle you've got this big white space. And the white space is really because you want a divider between this section and the headlines below it. A lot of the times when you're running a tabloid, maybe you have sections that you run every week that are kind of special sections, and you want them separated out from kind of the daily news or the weekly going abouts, so that they look different and people go, okay, hey, I know that section, that's a blotter, and that's what I'm looking for. So maybe you have special sections and you want them to stick out. By using a box or some other graphic element that's not a photo, you can really make your layout stand out. And what I'll do here is we'll go ahead and grab a rectangle, and we're going to make it as big as this blotter is. And we're going to come all the way down to that headline. And then we're going to go ahead and we'll fill it in with just a basic gray. We got it a little too big, so we'll fit it the way we want it. And the next problem is that we actually have it laying out over the top of all that content, and we don't want it on top of that content. So we're going to go up here to Object, and we're going to go to Arrange. And in Arrange you have different options for bringing things forward, backward, that kind of thing. And what it does is it actually tells the computer how to lay out the objects one on top of the other, how to do the stacking order. And by sending this to the back, you've now given some separation to your page simply by creating a gray rectangle. And as you look at your layout from a little bit further of a distance, you can see that that gray box really did provide a lot of visual variety on your page. And so that's one of the reasons that you would go ahead and use a rectangle element on your page to make your layout pop a little bit. Now that looks pretty good, but I'd actually like this to pop a little bit more by adding some effects to the rectangle. And I'm going to do that by coming up here to my control panel again, And it says apply effects to the object, or you can just add a drop shadow directly, or you can add an object effect to the selected target. Now the first thing I'm going to do is add a drop shadow with this middle button. And so I'm going to click on that, and as you can see, it immediately added a drop shadow to my rectangle. Now the drop shadow looks pretty good, but I actually think that this gray, it would be nice if it was a little bit transparent. So to do that, first I'm going to select my box, and then I'm going to come up to Window on the menu bar. I'm going to come down here to my effects, and that's going to bring up my effects panel, and I'm going to dock that over here and then click on it to bring it up. And as you can see, right at the top it says opacity here, and this does exactly the same as your opacity button up in your control panel. It's just a different way to find it, and you just go and you slide it down, and it makes it look like it's making the page lighter, but you're actually affecting the opacity. You're now at 45%, and it looks lighter because behind it you have a white page. So it's just changing the lightness of that gray. If you had a different color page behind it, it would change the color slightly as it mixed with that color behind it that it was showing. But if you ever have a reason to change your transparency, you can do so right there in your effects panel, or you can come up here to your opacity on your control panel and change your opacity there. Now I'm going back to the 100% because I decided that I like that dark gray. And I've decided that, once again, making sure my rectangle is selected, to add some other effects by clicking on that effects button in my control panel. And here you see that I have different options for my effects. And maybe I want to go and try a bevel and emboss. So I'll just go ahead and click on that. And I get a dialog box so that I can change my options for my bevel. But for now, I'm just going to say that's okay. And now you see that you've not only added a drop shadow, but you have a bevel and emboss on that box to make it stick out a little bit further on the page.